Joanna's first glimpse of the estate came through a veil of swirling mist. Greywood Estate loomed at the end of a winding road, its slate roofs and tall chimneys piercing the overcast sky. She shivered, attributing it to the chill in the air rather than the subtle feeling of unease knotting her stomach. Her husband, Matthew, was already out of the car, eager to survey their new home. He had followed the real estate listing for months before deciding it was too good to pass up, rumors or not. The property stood on a sprawling wooded lot with ancient oaks that cast crooked shadows across the gravel drive. She could see the caretaker's house just beyond the twisted iron gates, a smaller structure overshadowed by the estate's imposing facade. Nightfall seemed to creep in early, enveloping the stone and mortar in shifting layers of darkness. The caretaker, Mr. Caldwell, stood on the steps as they approached, a man of few words and stern countenance. He greeted them with a curt nod and a handshake so cold it felt like he was wearing a glove of ice. "Settling in might take some time," he said, after helping them wrestle their luggage through the wide oak doors. The foyer was cavernous, dominated by a grand staircase that curved to the second floor. A chandelier dangled above as though suspended in midair, and despite the warm light it cast, shadows clung to every corner. Joanna found herself scanning the walls, half expecting them to stretch or contract. They had purchased the estate with the intention of transforming it into a charming bed and breakfast, or maybe even a small hotel. It had the space, the grandeur, the untapped elegance of a bygone era. True, the rumors about secret rooms and hidden passages were intriguing, but neither of them had expected to give those whispers much credence. And even if they were true, such a feature would be a unique selling point, something to entice curious travelers. As Caldwell led them deeper into the mansion, his lantern revealed long hallways lined with portraits of gray-eyed strangers. Some looked as though they were watching them pass, eyes following their every step. Others were unrecognizable, their colors faded into shadows. The caretaker explained which rooms had been renovated and which remained untouched. At one point, Matthew tried to peer into a corridor branching off to the right, but Caldwell firmly insisted they proceed straight, citing loose floorboards and a risk of injury. Finally, they reached the master suite in the western wing. A high canopy bed presided over an ornate room with tall windows. Joanna stepped closer to the window, placing her hand on the frosted glass. Though the caretaker continued explaining the estate's quirks to Matthew, his voice echoed oddly, as if swallowed by the architecture itself. She could have sworn the walls were strangely angled, not quite matching what she remembered from the exterior. More than once she blinked, convinced a panel beside the fireplace had shifted, only for it to appear precisely in the same spot when she looked again. Brushing it off as travel fatigue, she joined the men in conversation. Their first evening passed in a flurry of unpacking and exploring. Joanna chose a smaller guest room to turn into her makeshift study. She planned to keep organized lists of renovations, furniture purchases, and eventual bookings. She ran her hand across the wallpaper, which was peeled in places, and revealed ancient wood paneling beneath. Inside, the autumn wind rattled dead leaves along the windowsill. Occasionally she heard the faintest of creaks, as though someone were treading lightly behind the walls. Remembering the rumors, she tried to imagine the excitement of discovering a hidden door or a secret passage. The estate was old enough that such mysteries felt plausible. Sometime after midnight she ventured out of the study. Moonlight streamed in through vast windows, illuminating swirls of dust dancing in the corridor. She thought about heading straight to bed, but felt drawn to wander farther, pulled by an inexplicable curiosity. Down one hallway, she found a door that she did not recall seeing earlier. It was partially ajar, revealing only darkness beyond. She stared at its simple brass knob, heart pounding in her chest, before deciding to push it open. The door led to a narrow passageway, lit by a dim overhead lamp that seemed on the verge of going out. Pictures hung crookedly on the walls, unfamiliar figures, their features blurred by neglect. At the end of the corridor, another door beckoned. She twisted the knob and the door swung open, to reveal the master suite's hallway. Bewildered, she glanced back down the passage she just walked, but it was gone, replaced by a solid wall with no door in sight. A gasp escaped her. She flicked on the overhead light in the master suite hallway, but it flickered weakly and illuminated nothing unusual. The sense of displacement was so disorienting that she hurried back to the bedroom, her pulse racing, convinced she must have been half asleep or lost in daydreams. Matthew took the news about the shifting door with a shrug the next morning. Sitting in the sunroom, he was already making lists of contractors to call for the renovations. "This place is old," he said. "Strange angles, uneven floors. Besides, you were tired. Let's not jump to conclusions about doors moving around on their own." Though he tried to sound reassuring, she saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. They spent much of that day mapping out which rooms they wanted to restore first. Matthew made notes on a blueprint they'd received from the real estate agent, while Joanna compared the rooms they'd visited against the floor plan. Oddly enough, certain measurements seemed inconsistent. A corridor on the plan appeared shorter than the one they walked in person, and one guest room's wall was several feet further out than indicated. She felt as if the blueprint was mocking her, refusing to align with the estate's physical reality. Pressing a corner of the page with her thumb, she whispered the caretaker's words to herself. It might take some time to settle in. Understatement of the century, she thought. By the afternoon, they found themselves in a hidden library on the first floor, the smell of old books thick in the air. Untouched for years, the place was a treasure trove of antique volumes and dusty secrets. As Matthew flipped through an ancient ledger that detailed housekeeping expenses, Joanna pulled a thick red book from the shelf. Its title was nearly illegible. The gold embossing faded. Inside were pages of scribbled notes, diagrams of the mansion's layout, and cryptic entries that referred to missing rooms, corridors that shouldn't exist, and repeated references to something called the shifting walls. Scenes of families living in the estate flickered through her mind. Children running through passageways, visitors losing their way and never being found, servants whispering about the labyrinth behind the walls. A sudden thump echoed overhead, startling them both. They looked at each other, hearts pounding, uncertain whether a raccoon in the attic, or something far stranger, had caused the sound. Joanna tucked the red book under her arm as they made their way upstairs. They followed the noise to a locked door at the end of an unlit corridor. Matthew tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Oddly, it felt warm to the touch, as though someone were inside with a feverish body temperature. He pressed his ear to the door and caught a faint scraping sound, too soft and unsettling to identify. They decided to leave it for the moment, not eager to break down a door without reason. Yet the sense grew that the estate had secrets of its own, and not all of them wanted to be discovered. Several days blurred by as the couple busied themselves with practical tasks. Contractors arrived to assess the foundation, the wiring, and the overall structure. More than one shook his head at the labyrinthine design. One of them murmured half-jokingly, "Wouldn't surprise me if some of these rooms come and go. Old place like this, you never know what you're dealing with." Thankfully, nobody found structural anomalies so severe as to deter renovations, just the typical hazards of an estate its age. Meanwhile, Joanna delved deeper into the red book she had discovered. Within its pages, she found mention of a family that had resided there in the 1920 the Blackwoods. The patriarch, Lawrence Blackwood, was fascinated, or possibly obsessed, with the concept of hidden architectural features. He commissioned the excavation of the basement and installed hidden corridors, rooms within rooms, even rotating walls that worked on a complex system of pulleys. However, rumors swirled that he took things to extremes. By the 1930s, the staff had begun to vanish one by one. The citizens of the nearby town whispered about unholy pacts and malevolent presences. Some claimed to have glimpsed doors materializing from nowhere and hallways desecrating spatial logic. Nearly a century later, the estate had changed hands multiple times, but the rumors of shifting walls persisted. Though part of her dismissed these stories as the product of overactive imaginations, Joanna couldn't shake the memory of the disappearing corridor. She hadn't dreamt it, nor could she ignore the feeling that the layout changed subtly from day to day. Once, she insisted that a small nook near a window was on the left side of the corridor. The next day, it appeared on the opposite side. Confused, she showed Matthew, but by then it had inexplicably returned to the left side, making her look foolish. The estate was playing with her mind, and she wasn't sure how much more she could handle. Late one afternoon, with storm clouds gathering, Joanna wandered into the eastern wing alone. She told Matthew she wanted to photograph the state of the hallway for renovation records. In truth, she felt compelled to explore, as if guided by some invisible thread. Her camera's flash illuminated tapestries and corners of the corridor that had dwelled in darkness for decades. At the far end, she noticed a door ajar, the same brass knob as before. Heart thumping, she approached, camera clutched in one hand. Inside was a small parlor room that smelled of dust and varnish. The walls were covered with portraits in heavy gilt frames, each depicting a different member of the Blackwood family. One painting stood out. It showed a woman with large, melancholy eyes, gazing not straight ahead but slightly off to the right, as if looking at something in the corner. The nameplate read Beatrice Blackwood, 1927. Joanna took a step closer, noticing that the brushstrokes on the corner of the painting were blurred, as if the artist hadn't wanted to reveal whatever the woman was looking at. She heard a whisper behind her. Wielding her camera, she spun around, flash going off reflexively. The sudden burst of light revealed an empty sofa, tattered drapes, and a sideboard with tarnished silver. She pressed her back to the wall to steady herself. As she inched along the perimeter of the room, her shoulder bumped a hidden latch. Something clicked, and a recessed panel swung inward. A breath caught in her throat. Beyond the panel was a corridor lit by a faint glow that beckoned her forward. She stepped inside, trembling. The corridor was short, leading to a spiral staircase that descended. Each step groaned and threatened to collapse underfoot. Downstairs, the air was clammy and oppressive. She discovered a cellar-like room filled with shelves. Rows of old diaries, black and white photographs, and brittle letters lined every surface. In one corner, an old mirror stood covered by a white sheet. Compelled by curiosity, she lifted the sheet and found her own reflection, ghostly in the dim light. She saw the corridor behind her in the mirror, or so she thought. Yet as she turned to look over her shoulder, nothing was there, only cold stone walls. In the reflection, the corridor continued infinitely, lined with doors that stretched away into darkness. She let out a soft cry and spun away, heart hammering. Rapid footsteps echoed above her, and she felt a surge of relief, thinking Matthew had come to find her. "I'm down here," she called. The footsteps paused but didn't respond. Her hair stood on end. She grabbed her camera and hurried back up the spiral staircase, determined to flee. When she reached the top, she found nothing but an unfamiliar hallway. The parlor room was nowhere in sight. Trying to maintain composure, she snapped a photo, though the flash revealed only a sea of closed doors. Panic set in. She picked a door at random and pushed it open, stepping into a dingy storage room that smelled of mothballs. A single window revealed the courtyard below, and to her immense relief, she recognized the fountain. Summoning her courage, she slipped out of the storage room and rushed down a flight of stairs, re-emerging in the foyer. Matthew was there, looking alarmed. "Where were you?" he asked. "I heard you calling, but it sounded like it came from the walls." They soon hired a professional team of restorers, hoping that more eyes on the premises would reduce the tension. The presence of others helped only slightly. For a time, Joanna and Matthew acted as if everything were normal, but soon the team reported losing tools or finding themselves in corridors that abruptly ended. Planks of wood vanished from the supply room. The more the restorers tried to measure and map, the more perplexing the estate became. Their complaints grew from mild confusion to outright frustration, and each night Joanna felt the hostility in the halls mounting, shadow by shadow. Try as they might to maintain composure, a weight pressed upon them. Everyone who worked in the house sensed it, the intangible feeling of being watched by useless eyes. The caretaker Caldwell remained unperturbed, going about his daily tasks with mechanical efficiency. Each time Joanna tried to question him about the estate's anomalies, he would brush her off with vague assurances. The house is old, it has its moods. She wanted to press him, to demand that he admit the truth, whatever it was. But something about his cold demeanor discouraged further attempts. The couple found themselves arguing more over trivial matters. Matthew blamed stress. Joanna blamed the house. Their bed and breakfast dream was swiftly unknotting. Renovating a monstrous labyrinth wasn't in the original business plan. Late one night, a storm raged outside. Rain pelted the windows, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. Joanna lay awake, listening to the rhythmic drip of water from a leak in the ceiling, occasionally drowned out by a groan from the floorboards below. Finally, she could bear it no longer and got out of bed, deciding to search for a bucket to catch the leak. The hallway light flickered, casting grotesque shapes on the walls as she made her way toward the closet. Halfway there, she realized she was no longer sure of her direction. The corridor seemed to stretch and bend in an unfamiliar manner, the paintings on the walls replaced by different ones she'd never seen before. It was as though she'd stepped into a completely new part of the house, one that gave no indication of how to get back. She quickened her pace, the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears. Rounding a corner, she stumbled upon a door with the same brass knob she'd encountered before. This time, the door was locked from the outside, a heavy padlock attached. She froze, breathing shallowly. That sense of unnatural warmth reached her hand as she touched the padlock. Something alive was in there, and it was close. She recalled the day she and Matthew had heard the scraping sounds from the other side. Rain hammered the windows, the wind rattled the glass, and suddenly it felt as though the entire estate exhaled a breath. She heard a click, looked down, and saw the padlock swing open. The door creaked as if pushed from inside. She stared into the darkness beyond. When she lifted her flashlight, something retreated behind the door. A hunched shape that rattled and hissed. Panic surged. She wanted to flee, but she felt compelled to find out what hid in that room, to settle the question once and for all. Stepping forward, she shone her light into the darkness. It was a large storage room lined with shelves of broken glass, tattered clothes, and dusty crates. In the center sat a wooden chair turned away from the door. From behind it a shape rose, impossibly elongated. She caught a fleeting glimpse of something like a face pale as bone, eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. It vanished behind a stack of crates, leaving Joanna trembling. Her flashlight flickered, threatening to die at the worst possible moment. The doors slammed behind her, sealing her inside. She screamed for Matthew, banging on the walls until her hands ached. She could feel the estate shifting around her again, rearranging corridors and sealing exits. Eventually, she sank to the floor, certain she could hear the faint scraping of nails on the other side of the crates. Hours must have passed before the door finally opened of its own accord. Joanna stumbled out, exhausted, into a corridor she recognized, a short hallway next to the master suite. She burst into the bedroom and found Matthew frantic, clutching the red book. He said he'd woken to find her missing and had spent hours knocking on walls, searching. "What happened?" he asked, shaken by the sight of her disheveled state. She told him everything in a rush. He tried to comfort her, though she saw his own terror mirrored in his eyes. That night, they made a decision. The estate wasn't worth their sanity. They would sell it as soon as possible, leave if necessary. Sleep was impossible. Instead, they huddled together, waiting for dawn. When morning finally arrived, they packed their essentials into suitcases, planning to drive to a hotel and list the estate at a loss if they had to. But the house seemed to have other plans. The corridors twisted into a labyrinth of doors, many of which opened into dead ends or led them in circles. Even the grand foyer was unreachable. For hours they wandered. They tried windows, only to find them locked or blocked from the outside. Their voices echoed in the silent halls, panic rising with each unsuccessful attempt to navigate out. At some point they became separated. Joanna found herself alone, battered by terror, as she sped through corridor after corridor. Faintly she heard Matthew calling her name, but never could she find him. Finally, in a desperate moment, she reached a door that led into what looked like the caretaker's office. Mr. Caldwell was there, seated serenely behind a wooden desk. He looked up, eyes devoid of surprise. "I see the house has brought you to me," he said quietly. Trembling, she pleaded for his help. "We just want to leave. Please, tell me how to get to the front entrance." He sighed, removing a ring of keys from his desk drawer. His expression was neither sympathetic nor malicious. but resigned. I've tended this place for many years. The estate chooses its occupants. If it isn't finished with you—" He stood and placed a heavy key in Joanna's hand. "Try this on the main door, if you can find it." She fled the office, key clenched in her fist. This time the corridors seemed to unfurl like petals on a flower, guiding her back to the foyer. She found Matthew waiting there, eyes full of relief. Together they ran to the front door, seemingly the one space that hadn't changed. With trembling hands, Joanna slid Caldwell's key into the antique lock, bracing for disappointment. To her amazement, it turned. A moment later, the front door creaked open onto a sunlit morning, as if the storm had never occurred. Without a word, they hurried outside, suitcases clutched tight, leaving the estate looming behind them. In the car, they stared back at Greywood Estate in silence. Joanna's heart pounded, as if expecting the walls to expand outward and reclaim them. But nothing happened. The iron gate let them pass without resistance, and soon the estate shrank into the distance. She released a shaky breath. They drove away, hearts pounding, unsure if what they had experienced was real or a collective nightmare. After a long moment, Matthew reached for her hand. She squeezed it, tears burning her eyes. Neither of them spoke for a while, but the uneasy question weighed on both of them. Had they truly escaped, or did the estate have a reach that extended beyond its walls? As they rounded the final curve in the road, Joanna glanced in the rearview mirror. For an instant, she thought she saw one of the estate's windows vanish, like a door being closed from within. In its place, the wall shifted, sealing away its secrets. Then the mansion was gone from view, hidden behind the tall, silent trees.